French President Emmanuel Macron, in his characteristic diplomatic yet firm style, responded to former U.S. President Donald Trump's recent remarks about a supposed Ukraine deal allegedly offered by Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Macron's reaction reflects not only the complexities of international diplomacy but also the intricate balancing act that European leaders must perform when dealing with statements that have the potential to influence ongoing geopolitical conflicts, particularly one as consequential as the war in Ukraine, which has already reshaped the contours of global alliances, security frameworks, and strategic calculations across NATO, the European Union, and beyond. And Macron, who has consistently projected himself as both a defender of European unity and a pragmatic interlocutor with Russia, found himself once again navigating between outright dismissal of what he considered speculative or politically motivated rhetoric from Trump, and the necessity of addressing the underlying fears such comments might stoke within European populations concerned about the stability of the continent, the credibility of NATO, and the future of Ukraine's sovereignty, because Macron, unlike Trump, sees the war not as a distant chessboard maneuver but as a direct existential challenge to European security, given that Ukraine's fate is inextricably tied to the credibility of the post-World War II international order, to the sanctity of borders in Europe, and to the very idea of liberal democracies resisting coercion from authoritarian regimes. And so Macron, speaking from Paris during a press briefing, emphasized that no deal concerning Ukraine's territorial integrity or political future could be negotiated or legitimized without Kyiv itself being at the center of those discussions, asserting in no uncertain terms that France, along with its European partners, has never and will never accept arrangements brokered over the heads of the Ukrainian people, particularly deals that appear to serve the political ambitions of outside leaders or cater to Moscow's long-standing strategic goal of weakening Western unity. And in responding to Trump's insinuation that Putin had suggested some form of deal that might end the war quickly, Macron warned that such quick-fix solutions are often traps, designed to divide allies, undermine the resilience of Ukraine, and create the illusion of peace while in fact entrenching Russian control over illegally occupied territories. And Macron, with his trademark caution, refrained from directly insulting Trump, but he made it clear that European leaders cannot afford to take lightly the words of a former U.S. president who still commands significant political attention at home and abroad, particularly as Trump is once again a leading figure in American politics and could potentially return to the White House, which means his statements, even if speculative or ungrounded, resonate across capitals in Europe, Kyiv, and Moscow. And Macron's diplomatic rebuttal also tied into his broader vision for Europe's role in global security, as he once again highlighted his call for strategic autonomy, the idea that Europe should not be entirely dependent on the shifting moods of Washington, but instead build up its own defense capabilities, political cohesion, and diplomatic weight, so that it can respond coherently to challenges like Russia's aggression regardless of the political orientation of whichever administration occupies the White House. And in this sense Macron's comments were not merely about Trump, Putin, or Ukraine, but about Europe's larger identity crisis. Should the continent continue to be a junior partner to U.S. security guarantees, or should it mature into a geopolitical actor capable of defending itself and shaping its neighborhood? And this debate has only become more urgent as Trump's words once again reminded Europeans of the unpredictability of U.S. commitments, because even during his presidency Trump frequently questioned NATO's relevance, criticized allies for not spending enough on defense, and hinted at deals with Putin that unsettled Eastern European states like Poland and the Baltic nations, all of whom see Russia as an existential threat. And Macron's response also pointed to a deeper philosophical divide. While Trump tends to view international relations through a transactional lens, often reducing conflicts to deals that can be made between strongmen, Macron insists that the Ukraine war is not merely about bargaining chips but about principles, sovereignty, freedom, the right of peoples to choose their alliances, and the rejection of aggression as a legitimate tool of foreign policy. And Macron, who has at times faced criticism at home and abroad for engaging with Putin too long or too optimistically before the full-scale invasion in 2022, now seems determined to show that he has learned from those experiences and is unwilling to entertain notions of deals that appear to reward Moscow for its aggression, because to him, any settlement must be based on international law, respect for Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, and guarantees of security not just for Kyiv but for Europe as a whole. And yet Macron also recognizes the political theater at play in Trump's remarks. By claiming that Putin is offering him a deal or that he could end the war quickly, Trump is appealing to an American domestic audience weary of foreign entanglements and financial aid to Ukraine. And Macron understands that such rhetoric, while effective in U.S. campaign politics, risks weakening Western resolve by feeding into the narrative, popular in some quarters, that continued support for Ukraine is futile or wasteful. and so his response sought to reassure both Ukrainians and Europeans that France, at least, remains unwavering in its commitment to supporting Kyiv, for as long as it takes, a phrase that has become the rallying cry among Western leaders. And in his lengthy remarks, Macron also reminded the public that Putin has repeatedly used the language of negotiations as a tactical ploy, offering vague notions of peace while simultaneously escalating military actions, targeting civilians, and attempting to freeze the conflict on terms favorable to Russia. And he warned that falling for such tactics is precisely what Putin hopes Western democracies will do, especially as they face internal political divisions, economic pressures, and war fatigue. And therefore Macron's response to Trump was as much a message to Moscow as it was to Washington, that Europe will not be swayed by promises of quick peace deals or intimidated by threats of escalation, and that France, along with its allies, will continue to provide Ukraine with military, economic, and diplomatic support until a just and sustainable peace is achieved. And while Macron stopped short of directly questioning Trump's credibility, his tone made it evident that he viewed the former U.S. president's claims with skepticism, especially given that Putin has every incentive to exaggerate his willingness to negotiate with Western leaders who might return to power, as a way of sowing discord among current administrations and fueling debates over whether to continue supporting Kyiv. And Macron, in articulating his stance, also invoked history, reminding his audience that appeasement of aggressors has never led to lasting peace, a thinly veiled reference to the lessons of the 20th century, particularly the 1930s, when European leaders underestimated the ambitions of authoritarian regimes and sought quick compromises, only to face far greater conflicts later. And by framing the Ukraine war in this historical context, Macron sought to elevate the stakes beyond day-to-day political maneuvering, presenting it instead as a test of whether the democratic world has learned from its past mistakes and is willing to uphold the principles that underpin international order. And in doing so, Macron positioned himself as both a realist and an idealist. Realist in acknowledging that the war will not end through illusions of quick deals, and idealist in defending the notion that principles still matter in international relations. And as the press conference continued, Macron fielded questions about whether he thought Trump, if re-elected, could actually change the trajectory of the war. And while he declined to speculate, he reiterated his belief that the strength of the Western alliance lies in its unity, and that any shift in U.S. policy would have profound consequences, but that Europe, under his vision, must be prepared to carry more of the burden, both to protect Ukraine and to safeguard its own future. And thus Macron's response to Trump was not a mere rebuttal but an articulation of a broader strategy, to maintain resolve, prevent divisions, and reinforce Europe's role as a key actor in shaping the outcome of the war, while also subtly reminding Americans that Europe has much at stake and cannot afford the kind of transactional diplomacy that reduces the lives of Ukrainians to bargaining chips. And in the end, Macron's words were less about scoring points against Trump and more about asserting France's, and Europe's, commitment to principle, unity, and resilience in the face of both Russian aggression and political noise from across the Atlantic.